Good morning, world. My name is Steve Rao. I'm the host of Pod TV's World Edition, soon to be a part of the Roku network. And live from North Carolina, the All America city of Morrisville, I'm here today to host our show, The Worst President of the United States, as we lead up to President's Day. We've had 45 citizens of our nation, the highest ranked citizens of our country, who all have one thing in common. They took the oath of office that they would, to the best of their ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Each president has made an impact on the history of our nation. There have been great ones, there have been good ones, and there have been very, very bad ones. And we are today going to discuss 4 presidents as I welcome my panel. But first, let me go over the presidents. First, the 36th president of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson. The 43rd president of the United States, George Walker Bush. The 44th president of the United States, Barack Obama. And the 45th president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Let us now begin our show. We'll welcome our panelists one by one as they will join me on our discussion as we analyze the key achievements of each president, those terrible weaknesses that they had, and whether they could manage crisis, and what would make them worse than the other president. Please join me now in welcoming, first of all, Nick Paladiva, Kimberly Calhoun, the founders of IBM TV, Pod TV, and now we have Adam Lamparello from Georgia, Peter Bennett from Modern Investing with Sasha, Sasha Starr, the host of Modern Investing with Sasha, and my co-host and producer, Mark Lee, radio celebrity of North Carolina. Welcome to the show. Well, today, folks, we're continuing our discussion. And so I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with, as we look at these presidents, their achievements, what crises that were occurring during their presidency, and how we rate each president coming out of the evening, with one of them being the worst of these 4. Okay, so we can go president by president. I'm going to go ahead and start with Adam Lamparello. We're going to start with you and then go with Peter Bennett, and we'll go to Sasha. And just if each person can be 2 minutes initially, and then we'll come back around.
Thanks, Steve. The first thing I'd say is that before you can decide who the worst president is, there have to be some agreed upon criteria or factors that everybody agrees should be used to make this determination. Having said that, from the list you provided, in my view, George W. Bush is by far the worst. He squandered the surplus left by Bill Clinton. He entered us into a needless and prolonged war that resulted, by some estimates, in the loss of over 100,000 Iraqi lives. He was not a leader. He was more of an ideologue. That's not to say that Lbj didn't have his problems with Vietnam, or that Obama didn't have his problems with Obamacare legislation and ultimately failing to unite the country, or that Donald Trump didn't have his problems with his divisive rhetoric. But when I think about criteria, I think on an economic level and on a foreign policy level. What was the effect of the president's decisions on the health, the lives, and the stability of people both here and abroad? And I think George W. Bush, on both counts, both by squandering the surplus, a tax cut that we didn't need, and a war that we didn't need, is by far the worst on that criteria.
Adam, thank you for that concise opinion sharing with us. We're now going to go to Peter Bennett to share your view of which one do you think you start with as the worst and why. And then as we go through the panel tonight, maybe we'll talk about other achievements that these presidents had and how we weigh them. I really like Adam Lamparello's analysis, and I do believe that it's something that we should look at, and I actually agree with him. But next, we'll go with Peter Bennett. Peter, please join us today. Thank you,
I'm going to go with Lbj, and it's funny. I was going to start with the defense of George Bush, and first of all, I was going to say that I don't think either were very good presidents. I mean, I rank George Bush Jr. in the probably bottom 10, but Lbj might be in the bottom 4. So I'll start with another approach, and I'm going to start with Lbj and George Bush and sort of contrast the two in terms of why I think Lbj. So first of all, the economy. The economies were decent under both of them. There were a lot of parallels, actually, between them. With the economy, if you look at what I keep looking at, the economic performance index, they were both very middling. Lbj was slightly lower than 50%. George Bush was about 50. And that's looking at GDP and inflation, but both left with problems when they were leaving. Now, for LBJ, he left inflation, which was probably because of the Vietnam spending. Inflation was already up to 5% a year in his final year. And then Nixon inherited a very bad inflation problem. And that was a real problem. For George Bush, it was the mortgage crisis, which happened at the end of his term. So very parallel in a lot of ways. Now, the mortgage crisis. So, Mike, here's the thing about George Bush. I thought some of his actions were fine, but and some weren't. But his communication style was terrible, and so he didn't accomplish a lot. He did go to the Democratic Congress 8 times about the mortgage crisis, which was set up earlier by Clinton and other people who did the Community Reinvestment Act, and I understand why they did that too. But it forced banks to make loans that they shouldn't have done, and that was part of it. So in the end, they both left with crises. Now wars. Oh my gosh, Vietnam. America's really first major defeat. I mean, we left with our tail between our legs. It was a terrible defeat. George Bush went into a war that he shouldn't have fought. But I'll say 2 things. One, he did win those wars. He went into Iraq, and it was considered a mistake by many. And Vietnam, by the way, Johnson, some people argue it was domino theory, but and that was okay. But I forgive Bush to a point on Iraq because one, the CIA told him that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons and was developing them. But the interesting thing is the reason they thought that was Saddam Hussein was fooling the world because he was concerned about Iran. So he was pretending he had nuclear weapons, and it actually fooled the CIA. So again, not great. And then you look at policies, both did great things in a lot of ways. No Child Left Behind, Bush. Advancing civil rights, huge for Johnson. Bush created the Medicare drug program, which elaborated on drugs, which expanded the Medicare.
Yep.
I'm almost finished here, but LBJ did Medicare and Medicaid, which most people think is great. And I do too, except for I have a real big concern that it's going to bankrupt our country since it's going into deficit in 2026. And no politician seems to be talking about that. It's going to be a huge inflation factor coming very soon. And then finally, so the wars, look, 58,000 military personnel died in Vietnam. And he divided the country. The country is as divided then as it was now, and that's very rare historically. He didn't win the war. And then finally, the Housing and Development Act is considered, okay, the Great Society, right? But I was looking more and more at the facts, and it helped many minorities, but it hurt a lot of minorities in the long run. And let me explain why. Because most whites' net worth is number one source is their homes. And what happens when you do rent subsidies and create low income housing for people? They don't buy homes. So that probably every subsidy given may have decreased minority home ownership. So I'm not thrilled with either. I don't think either probably belongs in the bottom 4.
Thank you so much, Peter Bennett. We're now going to go to, before we go to Nick and Kimberly, let's start with Sasha Starr. Sasha, anything that comes to mind from Canada? Sasha Starr is in Canada. Thank you, Sasha. Do you have any opinions you'd like to share with us this evening?
Okay, speaking about these 4 presidents, again, as I proposed, I think in the last show a week ago, one of the criteria, and probably quite important ones, is that those presidents who held 2 terms should not be in contention for the worst president because you are insulting American people. So if they elected once president on first term, and he is so bad that we consider him to be the worst president ever, how they could elect him for second?
Well, and Sasha, that's the American. Real quickly, I'll interject. That's the mystery. I was actually thinking about that last night. But the thing is, as I looked at the history books, I could not find one positive thing other than his leadership of 9/11 of bringing the country together. of George W. Bush. Like Adam Lamparello said, now I don't know how he got reelected, but the war was a mistake. The weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, he might have gotten the No Child Left Behind Act, but our economy was a mess. Katrina was a disaster, right? He basically got in because he was the son of the late president, his father, and the Bush name. But I can't think of one thing. Now, he's a good man and he's been a decent ex president. We watch his daughter on the Today Show, and the Bushes are a good family. But that doesn't mean he was a good president. Now, how he got reelected, I don't know.
I didn't say that he was a good president at all. Did I?
But you said he should not be considered as one of the worst.
No, because he had 2 terms, and if he was so bad. Now, in George Bush Jr., let's see, not to mix with his father, I think that he had a tragedy of 9/11 on his watch, and that dictated many things like wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Afghanistan is not considered to be a mistake, although 20 years later, U.S. had to retreat from there. So it could have been a mistake, but only from 20 years distance, right? Now, Iraq, yes, it was a mistake. Again, he was misled, as Peter said, by CIA information. So, yet he was re-elected, and it was never in doubt. Actually, his first election was quite fought very fiercely with Albert Gore, and thank God, the Gore decided to sidestep and clearing up for George Bush. However, one president is in a class of its own. It's definitely Donald Trump. Unlike 3 other presidents who were American patriots, Donald Trump was Donald Trump's patriot, not United States at all. And he divided country as never, ever happened before. You're saying that Lyndon Johnson divided the country? It has nothing to do with what's happened now. With his big lie, the purpose of which is nothing but just continue to raise more and more money. And as a matter of fact, yesterday, he was challenged by one of, guess what, Fox TV reporter who said that, look, if election was rigged, get an A-team of lawyers. You raised millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, put an A-team, and at least in one state find something what happened that election indeed was rigged. But he's not going to do that because the big lie allows him to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. So furthermore, there is a formal principle of the fact that he was a one-term president, twice impeached, lost election, lost House, lost Senate. What else the one president in just one term can do more?
None of which is relevant at all.
Why not? Tell me.
Well, I don't want to. Go ahead, Steve.
No. Well, you retort back, and then we'll go to Mark Lee. And then
could I ask just a funny question? I think it's an interesting question for Sasha.
Absolutely.
So, Sasha, if you look at 2024, we don't really know who's going to run yet, but it is possible. To me, it's most likely either going to be President Trump or Ron DeSantis, and so what would you change your opinion if Trump won in 24 because now he's a 2-term president?
Good point, Peter. Good point. I think I will agree with you. If Trump will become president in 2024, I will say absolutely he is not the worst president. There are some people,
maybe he needs a little,
very few, but there are.
Maybe more time. Well, so let's go to Adam real quick to retort, and then we'll get to Mark. Adam.
Well, again, back to the criteria. What I look at is what did the economy in this country look like when these presidents left office? What did the world look like when these presidents left office? When George W. Bush left office, the economy was in terrible shape, and the world, particularly the Middle East, had been destabilized, costing thousands of lives and hurting our economy here and our standing abroad. That sets him apart. Now, the second thing I'd say is it's very difficult to judge who the worst president is because presidents are presidents at different times in our country's history. It's kind of like saying Babe Ruth would be a good baseball player if he played in the major leagues now. It's very hard to assess because of the cultural and contextual differences. And the third thing I would say is that I reject Sasha's claim that you can't be considered the worst president just because you served 2 terms, because guess what? A lot of presidents turned really, really bad the second term, and George W. Bush is a perfect example. The last thing I'll say on Donald Trump is Donald Trump did not divide this country. He was a symptom of its division. The media has repeatedly been dividing this country. Academics have been repeatedly dividing this country. People on the far left and the far right have been repeatedly dividing this country. So that diatribe against Trump is not only irrelevant, but it's ultimately inaccurate.
Thank you, Adam Lamparello.
You are eloquent as always.
He's very eloquent tonight. He's looking very presidential tonight. He's looking very presidential tonight.
Thank you.
Mark Lee.
I think he's trying to run for president. I think that he's actually maybe has a hope and a future as a presidential candidate. I don't see any problem with that. Who knows?
Mark, that's a great idea.
Hey, we might put together. Hey, I just came up with a even better idea, Adam. I think that you're really going to like my proposal and everything because, Adam, you represent the very much on this show and in a lot of other aspects, very much of what some people may consider a conservative mindset. I'm not saying that you are, but I'm just saying that's what some people might put you in the like the Lawyer's Den and some of our other shows that we have and everything. Some people would argue that I am the liberal side. So maybe we could have an age ticket, meaning there's the age gap between it, but also the kind of thing going on with the Adam Lamparello lead ticket. So I'm thinking the Lamparello lead ticket could be the way that we conquer this whole divide and everything. We could just put together an entire cabinet made up of people from international broadcast media. I'm already thinking that I need Kimberly to be handling the things going on within our economics, but also within our technology fields and everything along those lines. And I'm already thinking that Peter would make a great Secretary of State and everything. So that's just some of the ones I was already thinking.
I love the idea, Mark.
Well, real quickly, so Mark, what are your thoughts? And then we are going to go back to Adam, but real quickly, just tell us what your top pick is for the worst.
Well, there's a couple of things that I was going to bring up and all of that. One, I do agree with what Adam said, is that Bush had a lot of things going on during his tenure, and definitely, whether it was things dealing with the environment, whether it was things doing overseas, whether it was a number of other things. So he would definitely be on my list and everything. I don't want to totally let LBJ off the hook as well, because one of the things that happens within a administration is that, yes, they are oftentimes given credit for the things that they do that are good within the time that they are in office. So I do know that definitely the Civil Rights Act and other things were done around the time of LBJ being in office. But we cannot forget that at that same time, there was a certain person in another part of the political landscape, because, a lot of times it's not just the president himself, but some of the people that they have surrounding them. And there was a gentleman by the name of Hoover. And Hoover did a lot of stuff that actually attacked the civil rights movement. There was an entire program called COINTELPRO that was definitely about discrediting a lot of the great civil rights leaders of that time. And they were coming from all sides of the spectrum, whether that was Dr. Martin Luther King, or whether that was Malcolm X, whether that was the Black Panthers, or whether that was a number of other organizations. So they weren't all from just one side of the African-American civil rights spectrum than Mr. Hoover was going after, and things along those lines. So therefore, I can't let him off the hook, because I'm thinking, if you're the president, you're supposed to know these things, and you're supposed to know what some of your lieutenants are doing in that regards. And he also was not the biggest friend of a burgeoning women's rights movement at that time as well. So definitely that is a concern, and one of the reasons that I might not let him off the hook as much as others might. So that's just some of my thoughts around LBJ.
Kimberly, what are your thoughts? And then I'll come back in with the second round here, and we'll start off with Adam in the second round. But what are your thoughts?
Well, first off, thank you for allowing me this honor to be on this panel. And Mark, somehow we always relate on certain areas, and I think it's because we both come from a minority-based background. So I have to agree with your comments there. First, I want to make a point about George Bush's No Child Left Behind. I think that was the biggest failure of this country and for our educational system. The reason being is, and I just had this conversation today with someone, is it just pushed us more into all of this testing. But literally right now, today, there are over 40% of the students graduating in Atlanta that are of the minority based and African American that cannot read. Okay, they already know this. Did this program help that? And I will say this, before anyone argues this point with me, I was a mom through, many, many years. And before I became a mom, I set up reading circles for the schools back in the 80s because I knew the schools were not teaching the students. Kids would come to me and ask me to teach them how to read. And I set up certain reading programs at the school where my son went to, where I could take children into the library and teach them how to find the books that they wanted, but also get them started reading it. So I think George Bush's No Child Left Behind needs to be revamped, and we need to say every child can learn how to read, write, and do math. I think, just the basics would be nice. But having that high of a statistic tail is really, really bad. Now, then if we go to Trump, and I know this is going to stir a lot of commotion, but I look at, whether a president comes in and has to clean up spilled milk or whether they cause the spilled milk. And I think as history, as future goes and this becomes history, we're going to see that Trump was the world's worst president with over 730,000 fatalities due to COVID. And before anyone rebuts me, take a look at the fact a good leader leads you out of a situation, guides the country out of a situation regardless of what's going on. And he just couldn't do it. He did not have the commanding spirit that is required to carry this country out of this. Instead, we had a lot of contention and a lot of divide. If you look at 9/11, all fellow Americans united during one of the world's worst tragedies of our lifetime. One, because we had a common enemy. But again, we had an enemy. It was a virus. But Trump couldn't do that. So there is a huge spilled milk left behind in his wake. And in my book, that's bad, very, very bad. And it puts him at the top with Lyndon B. Johnson, who is ranked the worst in some of the articles I read. And then George Bush comes behind him. But I think we're going to find later, 750,000 fatalities in 1 year is going to put a bad mark on him.
Well, I'm going to begin the second. Thank you so much, everyone, for that second round. We focused a lot on George Bush and Trump, but I'd like to focus a little bit on President Obama and Lyndon Johnson. And I just want to share a perspective. And then, in my opinion, as the moderator of the show, I believe that both President Johnson and President Obama have been actually two of the better presidents that we've had, of course, in different eras. But I think we can learn. Although Vietnam was a tragedy, there were so many achievements of President Johnson, from Medicare, Medicaid, the Clean Air Act of 1963. He upheld and defended the Constitution of the United States, which he promised when he said, I will, Lyndon Johnson, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution by pushing through Voting Rights Act, by getting the Civil Rights Act approved. And he did all this by building coalitions within his own party, which is very hard to do today. Southern Democrats who had been opposed to voting rights and civil rights actually agreed. He spent the time as the president calling them. If you watch the movie Selma, where President Johnson was reaching out, getting those people. Maybe it's not realistic you can do that anymore as a president. So that's what I think we should look at is coalition building and those kinds of things. In terms of President Obama, he did get a lot done, getting out of the gate. It could be debated whether Affordable Care Act was a success or not. I know many Republicans are opposed to it, but he did get it done. From a foreign policy perspective, he got rid of the worst terrorist the world has ever known, Osama bin Laden. And he was tough on Cuba and had a foreign policy that was actually precise and concise and did even force Iran to sign a nuclear deal. So I think with that being said, folks, do you believe that these two presidents should be really thrown out of the list, and that we're really looking at the two for this discussion, Bush and Trump. I'll start with Adam Lamparello.
No, I don't agree with you. And in response to what Kimberly said, in addition to having the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans and Hispanics in history, in addition to presiding over a great economy, in addition to not getting us into needless wars, let's remember, Trump relied on Anthony Fauci to set his policy. Remember Anthony Fauci, who said we need masks, then we don't need masks. We don't need masks, then we need masks. He flip-flopped in every way, shape, and form. Trump's accomplishments clearly show that he's not even remotely close to the worst president. Now, the second thing I'll say with regard to LBJ, one of the unintended consequences, or perhaps intended consequences, of LBJ's programs was that they created a welfare state, and they created dependency on government by large portions of the population, particularly in marginalized communities. You see that continuing to this day, and that has actually harmed those communities. It has made opportunity less available, and it has made equal outcomes less accessible. The last thing I'd say about Barack Obama is that he should remain on the list. One of the things about a president, it's not just about the economic impact that a president has or the foreign policy impact. It's about the mood that the president's leadership sets for the country. And Barack Obama was not a good leader. He was a good orator, but he was not a good leader. He was very wishy-washy. Rarely did he take firm stands on anything. He was more like Jimmy Carter, I hate to say, although the consequences of his presidency are not the same. The culture and kind of the zeitgeist of this country under LBJ and under Obama was divided, not united, contrary to what Obama preached about uniting and not dividing, and had the opposite result. So if you want my opinion, on this list should be George W. Bush, number one, number two, LBJ, number three, Obama, with Trump off the list.
Thank you. And for those of you who know for his career, you're a professor at law school, right, Adam?
At Georgia College and State University, I teach constitutional law.
Constitutional law. Okay, yes, you're qualified to run for president. I mean, Obama was a constitutional lawyer, so I want dibs on the ticket.
I do want to rebut something that he said,
please.
though.
Yes.
In the sense that Trump nominated Fauci or let Fauci run the show, that just still showed his poor leadership skills. When things weren't going right, Trump should have moved in and assigned somebody with better skill sets for a pandemic situation. He should have assigned a person who was skilled at pandemic situations, maybe even rehired the people he fired. So truly, by allowing Fauci to continue screwing up everything, we still have 750,000 deaths on Trump's watch. That's what I look at.
I do have a quick question and everything, and this is actually coming to something that Adam just brought up and everything, which is, I don't know, and I know we're talking about the president here, when we appointed and made it a rule of government that we were going to have a medical emperor. Because if I'm going and everything, it seems to me that Fauci has been under 8 different presidents and has been across the board, across the different landscapes. They've been Democrats, they've been Republicans, they've been a variety of other things. And I think that outside of maybe the Supreme Court, that's the only job that I'm aware of that might have a lifetime appointment. But it seems like it's a lifetime appointment that's an unknown lifetime appointment. Supreme Court judges, we know that when they go in, they're not going to go out until they either retire or die. But this seems to be an unofficial lifetime appointment, and I don't know when that was ever made official by the U.S. government. Because, like I said, I was shocked recently when I learned that he had been under 8 different presidents, and they've all given him kind of carte blanche and everything. So I don't know what folks' thoughts are about that, and when we even added that to our political landscape.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, because I never knew that he was there for so many presidents. That's it's amazing how many that he worked for. But anyway, let's go to Peter Bennett, and we'll come back to you, Mark, on the president. But what are your thoughts about what Professor Lamparello so eloquently stated? I don't agree with him, but I think he did a remarkable job ranking them. Way to go, Adam. I'd like to see that before we end the show. We need to rank order these presidents, folks. But Peter, what do you think about what?
Well, a bunch of comments. One, if only we could put Fauci on the list if he had been president. I would have moved him right up to the top because, I mean, the guy probably funded the creation of the COVID and then denies it later. But there's a lot of evidence to that effect. And why were we giving $50 million to a Chinese lab in the first place? It's American money. And then that was the lab where it created. And there's a lot of accusations that he didn't tell the truth about it. And he's being self-defensive. So anyway, moving on. COVID, look, I don't blame Trump for COVID, and I don't blame Biden for COVID. More people have died this year than last year from COVID. But one difference is Biden did promise, but I know this isn't about Biden, but Biden promised to fix it. It's not fixed. But I don't blame him because, there was the Spanish flu. There was SARS. I think it was during Obama. There was other. And there's been episodes of terrible diseases and flus and SARS. And there's been other coronaviruses. You know what? These are not medical doctors. These are presidents, and they can only do so much. And Trump mobilized the vaccine effort in an incredible way. I mean, he got it done. People said you could never, my friend it was very anti-Trump said he'll never get it done. And I said, don't bet against him. And he had the vaccine developed. If you look at these specific efforts, he got all the private companies together, the drug companies, he funded it, he moved quickly. He did a great job, but you're not going to beat COVID unless you're a medical doctor in the end. So as for Adam's comments, I mostly agree. I think he makes the point about LBJ, and I think he created the Great Society, which in the end maybe hurt more than it helped. I'm sure it helped some people, prevented them from poverty. But look, if you take people out of jobs and give them welfare, those who could work, then they never advance. If you give them low-income housing, they never buy a house. And that's, as I said, the number one source of wealth for Americans. So he built the Great Society and you know what? People are actually, I believe I read, poorer today, than they were then. So all those years and years and trillions of dollars spent didn't seem to get the job done. So I'm not a big LBJ fan, plus, again, Vietnam. Back to George Bush, not a great president at all, terrible communicator. I defend him, on Katrina to a point. He was slow in response. He wasn't as bad as some of the press makes him sound. The mayor, first of all, he got an email. I read about this today. He got an email the day before that said that they expected leaks, but no, they did. I'm sorry, overflows, but they never expected the dam to break. So he reacted as if it was just an overflow. He has emails to that effect. Then where he was bad and FEMA was bad was he took a few days to react. They were too slow. Disorganization in FEMA, he should have gotten involved sooner. But within 4 days, there was the National Guard was sent there and a $10 billion package. And here's the interesting thing that I wanted to say about this. And this ties these two together, by the way, LBJ and Bush. So during LBJ's tenure, the government created an act that was going to build up the walls and the barriers around Lake Pontchartrain, if I'm saying that right, which would prevent the flooding that happened in Katrina. So what happened is 3 groups later, after Johnson's term, got together and they opposed it. Environmentalists who said it would hurt fish, fishermen who said it would hurt their fishing industry, and a parish north of Lake Pontchartrain that wanted to build a shipyard. So these 3 groups attacked the Army Corps of Engineers. And then in the mid-'80s, they just abandoned the project. So the whole thing could have been prevented. And Bush, if he was a great communicator, would have told somebody about this. But I know about it, and he never mentioned it. So he was a terrible communicator. But in the end, it never got built, and it was avoidable, the whole thing.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Sasha, then Kimberly, and Mark. Well, actually, Sasha, then Mark, and then Kimberly before we go to our third segment. Sasha Starr, what are your thoughts right now as we've been hearing our eloquent panel about rank ordering these presidents from worst to best?
I would like to make a point that there are 2 distinct meaning of president and the presidency. When we are talking about the presidency, it's one story. However, our topic today is the worst president. What is a president? Yes, it's true that he's supposed to obey and defend the Constitution or so on. But first of all, each president is a human being, it's a person. So, how can we defend Donald Trump, who was lying every day several times, who was not paying his people, contractors, and swindled so many people? He is the worst human being elected president of the United States. And doesn't matter, his handling of coronavirus was terrible, impeachments and all the scandals that he ever had. And he's continuing. Actually, what he's doing now, even worse than whatever he did as he was a president, because he is still continues his big lie in order to raise money. So he is really he is killing American democracy, because if U.S. people are losing their belief that the election is the ultimate instrument of American democracy, he is killing it right away. That makes him by far the worst president ever, and not only the United States, but probably any country.
Sasha Starr, thank you so much for those insight. I'm trying to stay out of it as the moderator, but I'm liking the arguments I'm hearing. Please, Kimberly, your thoughts before we go to the third segment.
Oh, Steve, your control is fabulous, because I know how you feel about this. You're so passionate about it. But I'm going to add to something that Peter said, because Peter is so good at this, and I always value his input. But if we're judging the criteria on somebody responding late, I think Trump responded a couple of weeks too late to the pandemic. I don't think he did his math very well. And if anyone really went and did their homework and research, they would know that Pirbright Labs in China, they actually do research on vaccines for COVID for poultry and livestock. And the Gates Foundation had just funded $500 million to Pirbright Labs in October of 2019, just prior to all of this hitting Wuhan. So I think if we all really sat down and started doing our homework, we're going to trace the money and find where the culprit really lies. But again, to kind of lean on what Peter said, I think Trump waited too late. And because of it, we had the highest COVID positive tested situation in the world, and we had 750,000 fatalities, which is more than what we've lost in many wars. If you want to blame anyone for wars, I don't blame Trump for COVID. I just think he didn't lead us through this as well, and he didn't listen to the right people. He should have fired Fauci the first weekend and hired a pandemic team. But I do want to say Obama in my book, even though I think Trump is really bad, I think Obama is really bad. He ranks really, really low on my list because of the Health Care Act. I don't think the Health Care Act was necessarily intended to help the people who really needed it. I think it was to help the insurance companies. And because of what I have personally experienced and have been through, it definitely was not to make healthcare more affordable. It has caused healthcare to go up because the doctors have to hire more admin to get the money paid to them for their services done. So I personally think Obama has ruined our country when it comes to the healthcare, and healthcare. Our medical health care should come first, because if we're not a healthy nation, we're not going to be a wealthy nation.
You know, I'd like to say one thing because you mentioned, well, first of all, if I could nominate one person who's the worst in the world, one entity, it's the press in the United States, which is dividing our country. It's horrible. I mean, it's horrible. And the mainstream media, particularly, much of them are just telling narratives, and they don't even tell the truth a lot. And I watch it all and I compare, and I always go to original source data, something I learned on Wall Street. My boss told me, always go to the original source data to find out something. If you want to find out about a company, go to the company, look at their investor, reports. But if you want to see the real truth, you go to the original speech, the original document, and then you compare to the reporting. So here's a perfect example. So Trump has been accused of being late on the virus and actions. But if you look chronologically, first of all, way early, he banned travel from China, way early. And Fauci opposed it, by the way, but so did the Democrats. They said he was xenophobic. They didn't want him to do it. But here's the interesting thing. They look at the timeline and they say within weeks he should have reacted. But if you look, I've seen clips and with the times and the days of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and a few other Democrats, and I'm not even faulting them because nobody knew it was going to be this bad. 6 to 8 weeks after Trump is faulted, they were at parties without masks, and they were saying that this is not serious, that Trump is exaggerating it. 6 to 8 weeks after Trump is faulted for that. And I've seen the timelines and there's quotes and the actual video of it. And so, again, the major media is destroying our country in a way and dividing us almost as bad as the Civil War.
I hear you, but I do have a quick question to answer and respond to that and everything. Well, actually, a question and also, which I may ask Adam, but one of the presidents is actually currently in second place if we want to go by the percentage of those that have responded to the poll, and the poll has not been tracking as well as it's done in the past, but we do have votes coming in, and currently Trump is leading the votes on the latest group. But the second person right now is LBJ, and LBJ did a lot around the environment. I would definitely give him credit for the conservation and things in that sense. And he did a lot around conservation measures and trying to protect our natural environment. It seems like he was a strong conservationist. But, another thing that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's a growing part of our population in the modern times, I don't know that it was as growing then, is the Latin American population. And that was something that I don't know that he did all that great a job of dealing with, even though I must give him credit for what he did with Fidel Castro, because when the Cuban dictator wanted the return of the Guantanamo naval base, which we know is still under our rule and everything, and was threatening to shut off the water, he actually had the Navy create their own water supply, which I thought was a brilliant move on his part. But he just seemed to spend a lot of time on Latin America, and I think that's probably because maybe it wasn't as big of a deal there back then. But I mean, Mexico has been either an ally or an enemy of ours for a number of years, even centuries and everything. So I'm still trying to figure out if maybe y'all have some ideas as to how he avoided that issue, because the Latin population has been continuously growing. I mean, it's definitely now almost the number one population. And of course, that creates a whole nother scenario, because then you have this group that is being lumped together, even though it's very much of a divided group, meaning that Puerto Ricans don't necessarily see eye to eye with Brazilians, Chileans don't necessarily see eye with Colombians, but they are oftentimes put together as a voting bloc. But my question to you, Adam, really quickly, and that was just my little thing about the Latin American population, is I was actually somewhat surprised that one, that he walked off, speaking of media, and two, that he went into the lion's den. What was Trump thinking when he went and did an interview with National Public Radio? I mean, that's like going into the lion's den. You know the standpoint of the viewpoint that you're going to be interviewed by and all of that. So I'm going like, I don't even know why he went into that particular environment. Like I said, I am actually a fan of NPR and some of their reporting, but I also know what their politics are, and I'm sure he did as well.
Well, to answer your question, I applaud Trump for being one of the few who's not afraid to confront and have discussions with those who disagree with him and have different opinions. He's not just going to stay safe and go on a network where everyone agrees with him, and I admire him for that. He's a fighter. And just a few more points. I didn't know COVID was going to come up tonight, but just to set the record straight, the truth matters. The death count has been fraudulently inflated. The vast majority of deaths are with, not from COVID, and the vast majority of the deceased were dying primarily of other conditions. Second, Donald Trump cannot possibly be said to be the worst president ever. Someone who presided over the economy, the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans and Hispanics, the First Step Act, didn't get us into needless wars, didn't cost us needless lives. You want to compare that to George W. Bush, who tanked the economy here and then took us into a needless war that cost us trillions of dollars while simultaneously supporting a massive tax cut that threw us into debt and that cost over 100,000 Iraqi lives? The facts and the truth matter. And the facts and the truth are that Bush is far worse than anybody on this list.
Thank you, Professor. We're going to go to our final segment. And, I guess I'll just start with the question as we, end the show with trying to come up with the best with our ranking. And I guess my question is, when we look at the presidency of our country, the oath of office is pretty basic. It's very short. It says, I will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America to the best of my ability. That's all it says. Article 2 spells out all the different agencies, all the different duties that the president has. Do you believe over time that the presidency has increased in power? I've seen people write about this, about what they call the Imperial Presidency, where we place a greater expectation of the things a president can do. Do you believe a president's role is just to set a vision and lead, to maybe do things that are not popular in that time in their presidency, to get things done for the country? I'll go ahead and start. And how do we, and I think Professor Lamparello has brought this up in the past, is that it may be very hard to compare presidents from these eras, because the fact of the matter is the situation is so different. The situation is so partisan. Any president who makes it through the nomination process, wins the election, is governing over a nation that is so divided on so many fronts. I'll start with you, Professor, and then we're going to go around just to share your opinion as we go to this final segment.
I think when you talk about a good president, a good leader, it's not very different from talking about, for example, a great football coach. Okay? How do you get the buy-in from your team? It starts with the mission and the values that you express as a person to your audience, whether it's a team or whether it's the electorate. Barack Obama didn't really provide any meaningful leadership in that regard. He spoke a lot of nice words, but he was in over his head as president, and that led him to be overly cautious, and that led to a lot of stagnation. Trump admittedly failed too because he was very divisive. George W. Bush, same thing. But at the end of the day, the mood of a country is going to be largely dependent on the economic and social consequences of the president's policy decisions. And that's why you have to look at those policy decisions when making this determination, both domestically and abroad. When you do that, George Bush is the clear winner, and Donald Trump shouldn't even be on the list.
Thank you. Peter Bennett, your thoughts on my question, and want to thank Professor for eloquently once again answering these questions, but what are your thoughts?
Well, in terms of presidents from different eras, yes, there were different conditions, and a lot of things were forced on people, like COVID, like the Civil War, which was coming either way, very likely. But, part of it is, in addition to the criteria we set at the beginning of the show, several shows ago, we talked about the economy, wars, policy, but also I've begun more and more to focus on judgment, and also who would you want today? In other words, based on what they did, given the conditions, who was wise, who was a good communicator, who would you want today? Basically. And a perfect example of that, since I'm after Lbj on this show, is Kennedy started to pull us out of Vietnam. He actually, I didn't know this till today, but he actually decided Vietnam was a loser, and he issued executive orders to pull us out of Vietnam. And when Johnson got in, he ignored those executive orders, and he built up Vietnam tremendously. That, again, the conditions, and there were even arguments then for was it right or wrong, because he had the domino theory, the communists, it would stop the communists, who knows in a way. But when you look at the totality of somebody's judgments, and also who would you want today, who was effective in getting a lot done, who was effective in making some good judgments given the conditions, I think you can tell, who you'd want ultimately.
Thank you, Peter. let's go to Sasha, then Mark Lee, and then we'll finish up the roundtable as we get to the final finish line here. Sasha, what are your thoughts about what I said about this notion of an imperial presidency? The presidency having more power, more expectations, and how do we factor that in as we arrive at this decision?
Yeah, I agree with both Adam and Peter that different times, different circumstances in all four presidents that we're talking about today. I remember that Lyndon Johnson, he became a president after tragic death of John Kennedy. Now remember that one theory of the reason why John Kennedy was assassinated is his executive orders and his willingness to stop the war in Vietnam. So I would then give excuse to Lyndon Johnson to continue the war in Vietnam because I think he looked forward to follow in John Kennedy's steps. So that could be one explanation. Now, of course, I already spoke about George Bush, that he was somewhat a victim of 9/11, and when he started his pursuits in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was probably more emotional decisions than anything else. Because see, okay, there are a few terrorists who organized and masterminded 9/11 attack, but you cannot start the war against all country. Okay, the pretense was that they were housing terrorists and he wanted to destroy terrorist base, and then one thing led to another. However, in Barack Obama, I can say that on his watch, there was a huge mortgage crisis. And by the time that he ended his 2 terms presidency, the economy was in very good shape. And in fact, it helped Trump to get a lead start as economy is concerned. So you can dismiss all these reasons for certain actions of certain presidents. That's what makes issue of choosing really the worst one really complicated matter, but not for me.
Thank you, Sasha. Very good. Mark Lee, your thoughts as we get to the
Well,
final
one
segment?
thing you actually alluded to it earlier and everything is I sometimes wonder while we're having this discussion and even kind of going along in a contest that is similar to something that Mr. Trump put together, the apprentice model of finding out who is the best and the worst and all of that. But that being said, you also have to ask the question, how much power do presidents truly have and how much are they actually being controlled by others that are in power as well? Because I know that is a conversation that's been going on for decades. I would even argue centuries. And whether that is maybe back in the early days, people thinking that it was folks that were very much interested in maintaining slavery, or whether it was folks that might have had criminal interests and therefore the mafia having some influence on some of our past presidents, or whether that was the current special interests, which include the pharmaceutical companies, the Rifle Association, and there might even be some other organizations on both sides of the divide. I'll just name two that were business oriented, but there are also organizations out there as well that are influencing and exercising their influence on these folks that are our presidents. So as might be another question is how much autonomy do they have? Because that's something that Adam was alluding to that he likes about Trump, and that's something that I have in the past liked to some degree about Obama, because I do think that he did have a little bit more of freedom and tried to bring some of his grassroots organization into the presidency, even though I know a lot of grassroots organizers that wish that he did more of that in his presidency, but at least he attempted it. And of course, he had to learn the landscape, because that's the other thing the president have to do is they have to learn the landscape as soon as they get in office. And sometimes that can take a while, which is the other reason that I am not a big fan of Biden being on the list so fast, even though eventually, because, I'm fair and all of that, I will probably put him on one of our upcoming lists, but I'm going like he's only been in office for a year. Has he had enough time to do whatever good he's going to do or whatever damage he's going to do in a year time frame? and all of that. But hey, there have been some presidents that have only served 6 months and done some serious damage as well. So it'll be interesting to see. And I have some ideas of some people that I may present on the next list. And surprisingly, some folks may get booted off this time. And I'll talk about that as we get into some of the closing statements and some proposals for next ballots and everything along those lines.
Okay, great. Kimberly, your final thoughts, and then we'll close
Yeah,
out.
I want to add something here. Everybody always brings up that the COVID rates were inflated because, people were already sick, and then, COVID kind of helped, unfortunately, push them into the grave. That's still a COVID death certificate as far as I'm concerned. It would be as if I were dying of cancer and somebody come and put a bullet in my head and killed me, then the bullet killed me. So I think that the rates were wrong in both directions because we weren't able to test everyone who died of COVID, or we assumed died of COVID. So many of those, they didn't put anything down. And I do a lot of research in this. And I don't listen to the media. I've turned that off a long time ago. I just want to add that I still believe, as much as I don't like what Trump did to this country, he waited too late to respond. He should have fired Fossey. All of those things show a very poor leader. Okay, they just do. But there were 750,000 deaths on his watch in this country because of it. But I still think Obama ranks very low on my list because of the Obamacare Act. And I think that he was weak in many areas. I do give him great kudos for bringing Osama down, bin Laden. He did a great job. He led our Navy team into doing that, or the Navy SEALs. But and that made a good commanding officer for him. But I think Obama is still one of the top worst presidents in my list.
Thank you, Kimberly. Mark, I'm ready to close out, but do we want to have closing messages, or do we just want to sum up and we'll come back next week?
We can sum up, and I see that Nick has joined as well.
Can we find out who won? Because this goes on LinkedIn every week. Mark,
I was going to tell you that right now.
Tell me who won so far. Okay.
Yeah, right now, in terms of the most votes and all of that, the most votes, and it was an overwhelming amount, was Trump, followed by LBJ, which means that right now, if we're going by our old method of doing things, Obama and Bush Jr. would be eliminated, and we would have to add 2 more names. I have a proposal and everything. I'm going to mention some other names, and y'all tell me which of these you would like to see on the list and everything. But among the names that I was thinking about adding to replace Bush Jr. and Obama include probably one of the best presidents for satire and comedy, because he was always great for comedy, but he only had 1 term, that being Ford. Another name that I thought about adding was Hoover, who has an entire dam named after him. And of course, I thought about adding Clinton, Reagan, and Kennedy, which of course means that there are people that love them, and there are also folks that hate them as well. So if anybody's got any idea of those 5, which 2 they would like me to add, I am willing to hear those conversations right now and everything. And Adam, I've been hearing you, and I've been listening to the conversation and everything. So one of the other things that I have decided to do, because I'm having fun with this whole concept, and this is coming back to like the whole concept of like a Star Search or Apprentice type thing, is I think that at the end or toward the end, and by that time, the one that everybody wants will probably have been on the list as well, we're going to revisit some of these folks that have been saved by the bail and all of that. So don't think that just because you've been eliminated that you're off the hook. So we're going to have a wild card round in which I may bring some of those back. So just because Obama's off the hook right now doesn't mean he's totally off the hook, because we're going to add a wild card round in the last one and all of that. So that keeps the drama going and also adds a little bit of Trump-like gamemanship to the whole matter.
Well, that'll be pretty cool, but also just want to let everybody know we are at the hour. So I just want to thank everybody for showing up to the world's worst president ever. And we'll see you next week on the same channel.
Bye.